Good morning, Wham! Wow. All right. Watching Tom Brady, huh?
Yeah.
So for the Pats are winning so far. Let's see how they do. But now we're here for chapter 6. Are you hungry, Connor?
Very. I'm very starving.
You're starving?
The starving time.
You're right. There you go, buddy.
Chapter 6.
Yep, the starving time. Well, before John Smith left for England, he counted the food in the storehouses at Jamestown. 10 weeks provisions in the stores, he wrote. It was October of 1609. Was there enough food to get through the winter? Smith seemed to think so. He expected the Indians to supply corn as they had before. Besides, the settlers had hens, chickens, and goats, and so many pigs that a nearby island was called Hog Island. In addition to all that, the woods were bounded with deer, rabbit, and squirrel. The river was thick with fish, frogs, and oysters. There were new people in Jamestown, brought from England by Captain Newport. 2 were women, Mrs. Thomas Forrest, the wife of a settler, and her maid, Anne Burris. Anne Burris's arrival led to a happy event which a poet, Stephen Vincent Benet, imagined 3.5 centuries later. On the first white wedding held on Virginia ground, will marry no courtly dame to a cavalier, but Anne Burris, lady's maid, to John Leyden, labourer. After some 6 weeks' courtship before wedding, when the leaves were turning and the wild air sweet, and we know no more than but it sticks in the mind, for they were serving maid and labouring man, and yet while they lived, and they had not long to live, they were half of the first families in Virginia. The Leydens soon had a baby. Can you guess what they named her? Still, more colonists arrived. Now there were many mouths to feed, but most were optimistic. Everyone thought Jamestown had seen the worst of its troubles. By the way, the baby's name was Virginia. Everyone was wrong. That winter, 1609-1610, was an awful time as any in American history. It was called the Starving Time. Captain George Percy, who was now governor of Jamestown Colony, said the settlers felt the sharp prick of hunger which no man can truly describe, but he who hath tasted the bitterness thereof. They ate dogs, cats, rats, and mice, said Percy, as well as serpents and snakes, and even boots and shoes. There were never Englishmen left in a foreign country in such misery. Our food was but a small can of barley sod in water, to 5 men a day. Our men night and day groaning in every corner of the fort, most pitiful to hear. Some departing out of the world, many times 3 or 4 in a night. In the morning their bodies trailed out of their cabins like dogs to be buried. What happened? Some historians say the Starving Time was an Indian war against the English invaders. The Powhatan may have decided to get rid of the settlers by starving them. He wouldn't trade with them. He laid siege to Jamestown. That means armed Indians wouldn't let anyone in or out. The settlers couldn't hunt or fish. They could hardly get to their chickens and pigs. The gentlemen ate the animals that were inside the stockade without much sharing. That made the others angry. Soon there was nothing for anyone to eat. A few escaped. Many of our men this starving time did run away unto the savages, whom we never heard of after. Percy wrote. In London, the Spanish ambassador learned of the misery in Virginia. Some said there was a Spanish spy at Jamestown, but a spy wasn't needed. The disaster was common news in London. The ambassador urged the Spanish king to send a ship and finish off the English colony. The Spaniards could have done it easily. So could the Indians, who never went that far. What do you think American history might have been like if either of those things had happened? Finally, in May 1610, 2 English ships tied up to Jamestown's dock. Of the 500 people who were left in Jamestown in October, when John Smith left for London, only 60 were left alive. So basically that's like 80% of them died, like 90% dead.
Mm-hmm.
That's even worse than the Pilgrims, if you can imagine. That's a lot of people dying. All right. Well, that's the starving time. Hopefully things will get better. I would have just packed up and left. All right, bye. Good night. Go Patriots.
Man, I'm ready for some pizza.